Welcome everyone to the fourth of our four-part TPM webinar series. I am Rose Kapsha from Tooling U-SME and your moderator for today's session. For over 90 years, Tooling U-SME has promoted the advancement of manufacturing by supporting new technology in industry and the development of its workforce to sustain manufacturing. We hope you enjoy today's topic on maintenance culture. You will notice on your screen a Q&A box where we would love to hear your feedback and your questions or comments. We will have time at the end of the session to answer any questions. A recording of today's session will be made available on our website at learn.toolingu.com. You will also see on your screen our facilitator's bio, and at this time I would like to introduce you to Drew Locker.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you all for joining us today on this, the final webinar on our series on maintenance excellence. So in the first webinar, we covered predictive maintenance concepts involving a lot of different technologies, and these days even getting into the Internet of Things, which can draw on larger data sets to help predict when equipment is starting to run into some difficulty. In the second webinar, we talked about the importance of the operator's role in what we call autonomous maintenance, or some might call operator-assisted maintenance. And then in the third episode, we provided some thoughts on answering a very common question that I get on this topic is, where do we start? So we covered, several ways of prioritizing. One using some data like more traditional measurements of OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, but also I went through a model that tries to provide prioritization using a number of factors and assignments of levels of those factors in a more quantitative, less biased way to help us focus our efforts, because most organizations this can be overwhelming and we need to kind of focus, and that hopefully gave you some, for those that attended, hopefully gave you some ideas of how we go about doing that. Kind of an easier approach when you don't have so much equipment, just gathering some data, OEE related data. Or if you do have a lot of equipment and it's the question of where to start is much more difficult to answer. Hopefully you found that helpful, some of the methods that we went through. In this, the final episode, we're really going to convey the vision that we're after, this culture of maintenance excellence, this striving for maintenance excellence. That's really our objective. So let's get started. First, is going to discuss what is culture. So here's a definition I found from Wikipedia that'll serve our purposes. It is the shared beliefs, customs, and behaviors that characterize a particular group of people, your organizations, forming a collective identity and providing a framework for their social interactions. I kind of summarize it more succinctly: the way people act, interact, communicate, make decisions, how they treat each other. Some people have told me culture is the way people act when no one is looking. It's like, okay. So let's break this down a little bit, starting with beliefs, and see how this relates to our objective, our vision of creating this culture of maintenance excellence. So starting with beliefs, there is beliefs, strong beliefs of traditional responsibilities or in traditional responsibilities. Operators run the equipment, maintenance repairs the equipment. And hopefully we gave some ideas of countering this belief in at least the first two webinars. So there's this belief kind of perpetuates this divide in the organization, not just the classic silos, but in terms of the expectations that are set. And this starts getting into some of the obstacles that you can encounter when trying to strive for this maintenance excellence culture, like very fundamentally job descriptions or job classifications, whatever terminology you use in your environment, in your organization. If those job descriptions and job classifications are kind of based on those old traditional responsibilities, they're going to be strong impediments, strong obstacles to creating the maintenance excellence culture that we're hoping for, striving for. So we have to, change them up front. And if it's a union environment, that means engaging the union. And often we've found we can add to classifications in between contract dates. Sometimes we have to wait for the contract date to kind of come on upon us. How we evaluate people's performance, individual performance too, and that goes beyond just job descriptions. But what are we recognizing and rewarding, or not? And if those practices are counter to our objective of this culture of maintenance excellence, we're going to have a problem. I mean, think about it. I can tell operators, hey, do more watching the machine and maybe being involved in some of the predictive maintenance tasks. But maybe that takes a little time. Or just doing some of the autonomous maintenance tasks. It almost always takes some time. And they're only held accountable when it comes time to their performance evaluations for, say, throughput. We're not going to do autonomous maintenance, or they're part of predictive maintenance for very long. So we have to take a look at these very basic business practices and make sure that they're supportive of our objective. This is true of metrics. And I've had this conversation just in the last few weeks around both maintenance and non-maintenance related topics, but all around metrics. So again, if operators are being held accountable for throughput, schedule compliance, and that's it, then they, again, probably are not going to be too keen to not just be part of maybe operator assisted or autonomous maintenance, because maybe, just maybe, that comes at a cost of some throughput. But more likely, it's preventative maintenance, more classic preventative maintenance. Operations won't want to give the machinery up to maintenance to do the PMs. And then maintenance very often is just responsible for uptime. And this perpetuates this divide, the metrics. Now, the good news is leaders define these metrics and they can change them, but they've got to understand and believe that they can. And the real challenge I find, and this is the topic of the last 2 weeks with some conversations with some companies, leaders at companies, is they believe that there is a shared responsibility and they can, both multiple organizations or departments can be held accountable to the same metrics. Too often organizations will splinter these metrics. One example, another company had nothing to do with maintenance, but it was procurement metrics versus the sales metrics. And it's like, who's truly responsible for on time and in full metrics? And, sales isn't, they're just responsible for selling. Well, actually, they strongly influence these metrics. So it's just an example. This is an example with operations responsible for throughput and schedule compliance. Maintenance is just responsible for uptime. This creates this divide, but it's true of how businesses measure themselves in pretty much all aspects of their business, not just around operations and equipment reliability. So I often have found myself over the years trying to make the argument, no, they can be responsible for the same metrics. It's kind of why I like OEE as a metric, because operators have a piece in it, maintenance has their piece in it, others have a piece in it, because it involves quality performance, run rates, as well as uptime or downtime. So it's kind of all inclusive, and that, from my experience, as when we start tracking and using that as a key metric for the business, where appropriate, in very capital equipment intensive businesses, all of a sudden you start seeing people, more collaborative because they're being held accountable to the same set of measures. So if these existing metrics are not supporting our objectives of developing this maintenance excellence culture, and we have to we have to address those and early, early in the process. So going back to, the definition of culture, that was beliefs, there's also customs and behaviors. So we have to take a look at that and how people typically behave towards each other. And in existing cultures that are very strong, as I would describe as blame and shame, this is going to be very difficult to overcome. Not insurmountable. It's just going to take more time, more effort on leadership standpoint, on their part. Just kind of really beating the drum and the messaging that, hey, we're in this together. So if there's a pre-existing culture of finger pointing, maintenance tend to blame operators for the problems. Operators tend to blame maintenance for the problems. We just got to acknowledge this and work hard to overcome it. The metrics will help with that. Holding people accountable for common metrics will help, but it's not the only thing. These are behaviors. These are learned behaviors that can be very deep-rooted. And it's going to take leadership to begin with, to stop with the finger pointing, because often it's leaders. And then, what I found is if leaders stop doing that, they start changing their language, focus more on process and problem and the equipment, not, who did it, who did what. Their teams will take on that demeanor of the leader, so we can start overcoming it. But if there's years of this type of culture, finger pointing culture, or what I might call blame and shame, it's going to take a while, and that's okay. So, just know we have our work cut out for us. Another part of this, cultural piece is pre-existing the lack of knowledge sharing between functions. Operators kind of know what they know to run the equipment, and maintenance, not always, but usually have a lot more knowledge about the running and maintaining of the equipment, but that knowledge is not always shared. And I mentioned this in the autonomous maintenance episode or webinar. So why wouldn't maintenance folks do this? Well, some people are just information is power people. Some people, they never did it. They're busy, they're running off to the next machine, and they don't have time to go teach or educate the operators. Some are bad intended. They don't want to share. Some see it as if they share the information that they're undermining their position in the organization. So this is existing, and I usually will see this early because we talked about, and we'll talk about it more in this episode, this webinar, that we need to educate all parties, and if we have the internal resident knowledge that we need about a particular piece of equipment, I will have the maintenance people, or at least encourage them to do the training of the operators. Don't always assume that, because sometimes the maintenance folks don't have that knowledge, the requisite knowledge, and will bring maybe the OEM in, the equipment manufacturer. However, asking them to do this, and are they willing to do this, and are they effective at teaching? Those are different aspects that we have to be assured we're okay if we're going to do proper education and training. So I always kind of try to observe very closely the interaction between maintenance and operators, as maintenance kind of see their role as a teaching role. I can usually pick that up pretty early, and then I'm like, okay, we can work on this, or we can build on this. If it's like they're just off and running, don't even say anything to the operator after they've done some repair, I'm like, oh boy, we got our work cut out here. So that's kind of looking backwards at our existing culture. Looking forwards, what's our vision? Cross-functional collaboration, teamwork, communication between all parties, maintenance, operations or production, but also engineering, and maybe even some other parties that are committed to the common goal of equipment reliability. And ideally, held accountable to the same set of metrics. That will help definitely with the teamwork. And then as we'll get into, developing some of these other skills that they may not currently have, like working in teams, problem solving skills. We'll get into that a little bit later in the webinar. So to kind of expand on this, so what does this mean? So operators have their role, that's the autonomous maintenance. The maintenance personnel have their role, that's the preventative and predictive maintenance, though I would add, operators are often involved in elements of the predictive maintenance because they're kind of right there, they're on the front line, they can monitor things that maybe the machine can't automatically. Engineering has a role. They should be looking at improving equipment design through what we call productive maintenance, which we did not cover in this webinar series. That's where we're making maybe changes to the equipment design to make it, more reliable, more time between failures, more accessible, more even basic changes to make it more visible, the conditions. We talked about that in predictive maintenance, where maybe we move gauges to make it more visible, put mirrors in. But, we usually get into more of the nuts and bolts of the design of the equipment. And I shared in the last webinar an example at a food manufacturer where, it wasn't just put a stronger belt on, they had to redesign the whole cam as part of a big piece of equipment to make it more reliable, more time between failures and repairs. So that fell into the responsibility of the engineering group. And then having all the parties very knowledgeable, fully knowledgeable of all aspects of the equipment, and have that internal capability to do everything that's needed, all aspects of it. At least they're part of what they're expected to support. So everyone has a role, everyone has a part, and they have to have the skills and knowledge to play their role, to fulfill that role, which often they do not. Again, that's where the training comes in that I'll talk about shortly. So expanding on the vision, here's all these elements that make up maintenance excellence. And first and foremost, kind of the foundation, the organization has to commit to continual learning and skill development. It might sound harsh, but I've been in enough companies where it was very apparent very quickly that the necessary knowledge and skill did not exist within the company for a particular machine, for whatever reason. Maybe the person that was responsible for setting it up has moved on to another company and they lost it. The organization lost that knowledge. It's quite common. That's usually the reason for this. Somewhere along the line, we lost institutional knowledge. So the organization has to just keep at that. And that means some commitment, budgeting of training, and skill development, and the like. We need this organizational alignment, which goes back to the discussion of measurements and metrics. So why not hold everyone accountable to the same metrics? One of the conversations I had recently was relating to maintenance was, you can't hold maintenance responsible for on-time delivery to the customer. I'm like, why not? Why can't we as a team be responsible? Why do we have to splinter up our metrics so finely between departments? Because we all do. Maintenance doesn't do their part. We can't run machines. We can't meet the schedule. We can't deliver to the customer. So getting that organizational alignment that I spoke about earlier is critical. Problem solving and faster problem solving and working together to do it. Not the maintenance guy coming in, as like a Superman helicoptering in to solve the problem and then running off to the next disaster. Not that. True problem solving. I'll mention this later in this webinar, but it bears repeating. Getting to true root cause. Don't want to offend anyone, but a lot of maintenance folks that I work with, they're good at Band-Aid solutions, but not root cause. And I can't blame them because they've never really been trained, in the skills of problem solving or been introduced to some of the tools we use to get to root cause. So we need to do that. Again, that'll be discussion when we get to training. But first, fundamentally, in terms of the vision, is people working together, true problem solving, not band-aid solutions. And commitment to innovation, like my example I gave, we're going to redesign this CAM system entirely. It's just one component of a large machine. And, that's going to cost some money. But the team working on that, which was not just engineering, but involved others, maintenance folks, and also an operator we had on that team, they put the business case together, gathering historic data, that quantified how much downtime we had related to these belts always failing. And, they shared that they tried stronger belts, and that didn't work either. And it was like, if I recall, definitely within 12 months, it was like 6 to 12 month payback. So I would hope most organizations would accept that kind of return on investment. But, we got to budget for these things, and we got to be, open to these things as an organization. And putting your money where your mouth is in terms of innovation. And it's not just buying things, it's also the time commitment as well. Now, if we do those things, then we can start reaping the benefits of maintenance excellence over time, like increased efficiencies, better customer service, because we can better respond, have higher service levels to our customers, because we have more reliable equipment. Certainly, from my experience, that we get much greater employee engagement, and they find it a more satisfying work environment. I know this for a fact because we do engagement surveys at companies. That food manufacturer I was referring to with the CAM redesign, they do an engagement survey every year, and we saw this loud and clear. Came through in the last engagement survey for the past year. So that's a good thing, great thing, really. And, by getting more stable equipment, that actually helps us be more agile, more adaptable to changes in scheduling and so forth. So got to have all these other things in place, the learning and skill development, the organizational alignment of the metrics and such. A commitment to enhanced innovation, problem-solving skills. If we have those things in place, then we can reap the benefits over time. The last thing I'll mention here is we can, if we're excellent at this, maintenance excellence, we can turn this into a competitive advantage. And that'll segue into our next discussion. So, just to kind of talk a little bit more about culture, people often will tell me we can't change culture, but we can. We can. It takes a lot of effort. How much effort depends on our starting point. As I mentioned earlier, it's a lot of blame and shame. We're going to have a lot more time and effort to put into it. But if our culture is already pretty collaborative, this is not going to be so difficult. But we have to understand leaders define cultures in organizations. And it could be subcultures, not just the leadership at the top, but the leader overseeing the maintenance group and the leader overseeing the operations group. If they are finger pointing, their teams are going to finger point. And people will, mimic and take note of what their leaders' actions and words are. And they'll mimic those. Just the way it works. I want to, please the boss, so I'll speak like the boss speaks. If they're finger pointing, I'll finger point. The aforementioned job responsibilities, job descriptions, job classifications, leaders define those. So they've got to change them where necessary. As I mentioned earlier, leaders define metrics and who's accountable for which metrics. The leaders have to change those. So leaders have to lead, very basically. And this is what I'm also run into for years, and this is happening a lot in the last couple of months. Leaders need to stop seeing maintenance as a cost center. Because when times get tough, and I'm having a number of those calls right now, a lot of organizations, their profits are starting to get squeezed with, frankly, tariffs and things. This is what everyone's telling me. And now they start looking, where can we squeeze some cost out? And they often will look at maintenance because it's a cost center. It's not generating, top line revenue, because we don't see it that way. We should see it that way, but we don't. They don't see maintenance as a strategic function that supports our overall business goals, like top line revenue and profits, as well as it can be a competitive advantage. Organizations that are more flexible and adaptable, more stable and predictable, they can use that in selling their goods and services to potential new customers. It's a competitive advantage. Now, you got to demonstrate it first and go sell something you can't deliver on, but it's a very real competitive advantage. But the conversations I'm having with some groups right in the last few weeks around this subject is, they're looking to cut costs, and some of the good things that we were doing in this subject is threatened. It's being threatened, usually by higher ups that really don't understand what they're doing. They're just looking for some sort of relief, short-term relief, and that could be cutting people. Like, the one conversation I had around this recently was, your throughput is not going down, your demand has not gone down, you're still running the equipment at the same rates, same frequency. So why do you think you can cut the maintenance costs, including maintenance technicians they were looking to lay off, and it not affect you? Did you think we were overdoing the PMs? We have data around some of these things. We had data around how it helped. So if you start taking pieces of the maintenance excellence system out, don't be surprised if performance starts to return to what it was before. So this one company, it's a privately held business. I'm talking to one of the owners, and the family-owned business, and they're reconsidering. But we'll see how that conversation goes. If I had any influence, I don't know, but we'll see. So, leaders define cultures. So it's got to start first and foremost with the leadership of these different functions and departments, and maybe the organization overall. We need this unwavering commitment in the good times and the difficult times. And as I just described, some companies are going through some difficult times right now. Those margins are getting squeezed, so they have to pay these tariffs and things. And where else are you going to get it from? In the difficult times, we start, undoing some of the pieces of the system that sends a horrible message to everyone. This is no longer important. And then they start questioning all of it. They lose their commitment. So even the folks that remain maybe are not as committed to this as possible, because leadership has demonstrated that they're not. Something to think about. So how do we kind of overcome some of the obstacles? How do we kind of avoid some of the common pitfalls? Approach is everything. So here's some suggestions from my years of experience on this subject. First and foremost, and it's really true of any change effort, why? Why do we want to do this? I talked about this in some of the other earlier webinars. What's the purpose for this? Because if we don't lay it out, and it's truthful, don't ever come up with a false purpose, because humans will see through deception very quickly. But you want to involve the operators in the maintenance responsibility, and they never were before. What are people going to think? As an example, if I'm the maintenance technician, I'm thinking, what are you telling me? I'm not doing a good job? Or you transfer enough of the responsibilities over to the operators, you won't need me anymore. And that is not what we should be doing. I'm not saying there are not organizations out there that approach this subject and that was their unstated, but true, their actual objectives with this. But we shouldn't be approaching it for these reasons. So we have to get that messaging out and repeat the messaging. Leaders in particular, allay people's fears, and make sure they periodically assure job security, or you're going to get a lot of resistance. Remove those organizational barriers is the third time I've mentioned. Job descriptions, job classifications, align those metrics, but also have a budget. There's going to be some investment required, whether it's for spare parts or for training. It's one of the things I look for, or we put in place, and then I look for that they're sustaining over time, is a budget. And is it a reasonable budget, year to year, to continue with this? Got to put your money where your mouth is. And, it's one of the things I do, these assessments, kind of enterprise excellence assessments. And there's like 25 things I look for. And one of it is the maintenance activities and part of the system. And one of the elements within that I'm looking at is the budgeting. Do we have a budget? Is it a reasonable amount, to support the objectives? Whether it's new equipment, training, staffing, just gotta make sure we're putting our money where our mouth is. Investment will be required, and continually. Very key learning from me is involve everyone up front. That doesn't mean we're going to apply these concepts everywhere, right? That's what the intent of the previous webinar, number 3, was how to prioritize. But you want to at least engage everyone and communicate to them. Here's what we're doing and why we're doing it. And oh, by the way, we're going to start over here and why, on this machine. Here's the data that maybe a lot of our associates had input in, and we arrived at these priorities because we can't do it all at once. But ultimately, everyone will be involved, and we'll hit all the key machines at some point in time. But we got to start somewhere. Most people would understand that if we laid that messaging out at the very beginning. If you do not, and you only keep it to a very small group, like within just maintenance, or even maybe a cross-functional but small team, the grapevine starts operating, and that's never a good thing in organizations. So we want to make sure we're communicating effectively what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to go about doing it right from the very beginning. And set expectations. We're not going to do this everywhere at the beginning. We just got to be practical about this. And here's how we arrived at our priorities. And that's, again, the importance of the third webinar. How do we develop the strategic approach? Then we, start laying in the training and education. I learned, do not assume the required knowledge is resident in the organization. I've learned that is not always the case. So we'll just lay that out. And some people can get a little offended by that, to say, hey, we're trying to bring everyone up to speed. And even the more experienced folks will say that was a good thing we did. There was a lot I learned. Great, good for you. Then we're involving them, as we discussed in the first and second webinars. We're involving operators in maintenance and maybe engineering in setting up the design of the system. What activities is the operator going to do or operator is going to do as part of autonomous maintenance? Which ones the maintenance folks are going to do in the more traditional preventative maintenance? And then how we're going to go about predictive maintenance, which can be involving operators and maintenance folks based on the nature of the technology that we're using, their techniques. And where I can, as I mentioned earlier, use the staff to provide the training. It gets better engagement, starts knocking some of the silos down. It starts, most people want to help others. So the people providing the training can feel good about themselves. And if we go about it the right way, the people receiving the training, and it's not just operators all the time, it could be others, they usually appreciate someone trying to teach them something new. So it can really help build the teamwork and camaraderie between the different groups. Begin to bring down some of those silos. So besides technical education in the equipment, equipment is specific to education, skill development, problem-solving skills. And that's of everyone involved, operators, maintenance, engineering, maybe other functions or departments would be involved in this as well. And they're going to work together to really solve recurring problems from the beginning, because we're going to find all kinds of problems wherever the area that we're applying the concepts in to start. And we want to, have them work as a team, use good problem-solving techniques and tools. And by the way, that all needs to be very closely facilitated or coached. Don't just throw a group of people together and expect them to work as a team if they've not had those opportunities in the past. Don't expect them to really be able to do problem solving if they've not developed those skills in the past. So it's got to be facilitated, got to be coached. This is a big gap. Oh, we set up teams. I'm like, well, who's the coach? Who's the facilitator? What do you mean? It's not going to go well. So, some people get a little offended by this. I'm a good problem solver. Maintenance technician might tell me, or even an engineer. And I'll point out the recurring nature of many, many problems that they, respond to. And ultimately, I can get most of them to agree, okay, maybe we're not as good problem solvers as we could be. Because we're not truly getting the root cause, and these problems are reoccurring. So we're good at, addressing causes, but not necessarily root causes. I try to kind of emphasize that to them. All right. And there's a methodology for problem solving called Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's like the mother of all improvement methodologies. And if people have not been provided a methodology for improvement or problem solving or both, then I can't blame them for not being as effective at this as they should be or need to be. So we have to teach them and give them opportunities to practice. And they'll get the hang of it. They'll develop the skills, the mindsets. They'll work together. So you'll get that team camaraderie developed over time. And it just works brilliantly. But you got to stay with it. And it has to be closely facilitated or coached. Please, please, please. Again, in terms of the approach we take, rolling out the elements should be based on priorities. And what I want to emphasize here is that if we try to do what I call the peanut butter approach, like, very shallow, spread it out. Hey, let's do autonomous maintenance on all the equipment. We will not do this very well. So we're firm believers of do a few things, do them well, learn from the experience, move on. Organizations have limited resources, limited time, limited budgets, and it can only support a certain level of change management. So let's not set ourselves up for failure and try to do too much, try to bite off more than we can chew. So once again, we're going to start in a limited basis based on priorities, and we should be able to explain to people how we arrived at those priorities. That's going to, hopefully, if you haven't seen the third episode or webinar, please do so. These are recorded, as Rose mentioned. So as we're rolling it out, this machine by machine, or even parts of a machine on big lines, big machines. Usually the big lines are a series of pieces of equipment. Learn from the experience, adjust based on the experience and the problems we encountered, and not just the technical problems, the team building problems, the communication problems, the skill level and knowledge problems, that kind of thing. So we make those adjustments and explain why we're making adjustments. Like, for example, we might be slowing down because we realize we did bite off more than we can chew. And we got to explain that. Communication ongoing is critical to this because people will see, well, they're slowing down. They're no longer committed. Management's no longer committed to this. And it's like, no, here's why we're doing it. Because our eyes were bigger than our head, I think is the expression. And we bit off more than we can chew, and we need to slow down, to speed up, basically. So again, approach is everything, and you can adjust the approach as long as we communicate. This is true of any change effort, to be honest, not just around this subject. Measure the results, but give it time. So there's going to be people that don't think this is the right thing, usually senior management. Go prove to me over there that this is going to work. And I'll usually say, okay, we have no problem measuring the impact of any improvement effort, but just realize it's going to take some time. How much time? I have no idea. A lot of it depends on the current condition of the equipment that we're working on. How long is it going to take us to kind of rebuild it to like new state or condition? And, maybe it's in decent condition. We'll reap the benefits or see the benefits in a relatively short period of time. So it really depends on our starting point. So if we have to prove as we go to get those naysayers, usually in leadership, but not always, it could be others. Operators won't be able to do this. Look for small wins. Prioritize, and you get this list of priorities of different assets, but look within that and say, okay, where do we think we can, a little more assured of a win? And usually people have some good input there. Because if people see the benefits, they'll want more and more of it. And that's a brilliant thing. And again, really true of any change effort. Celebrate the wins. Acknowledge when we're not winning. Don't ever hide from that. And humans will see through the deception. This isn't working. I don't know what they're talking about. So, say, okay, this didn't quite work the way we thought. This is what we learned. Just keep communicating. But where we are seeing gains in time, then let's celebrate those and provide some recognition to the people involved. It's a human need to get recognition, so let's provide it where it's due, where it's deserved. Never false recognition or undeserved recognition. So culture takes time. In any organization, this is no different, even though it's kind of maybe a subset of a broader culture. And that can take 2 to 3 years to begin to take hold. Any cultural change at a single site. People ask me how long. I said, it'll begin to take hold in 2 to 3 years. Still not sustainable. We got to make sure all these other things are put in place, the management system, and got to make sure we're hiring the right people coming in. If we had some turnover, so a new sheriff comes in town, a new general manager comes in. It doesn't buy into these concepts. You can lose it at a snap of your finger. Maybe not completely, but I've seen that happen way too often. And it's like, didn't you ask this guy, this person who, when they were a candidate, these questions to see, are they supportive of enterprise excellence and maintenance excellence? And we didn't ask that question. Or maybe they misled during the interview. Over the years, folks, I've encountered this way too many times. I get a call from like a CEO. We seem to be losing it. Look around, different leaders I don't recognize, which is fine. But then you start talking to them and they're like, they don't buy into this. And they start dismantling the system. Sometimes a lot all at once, sometimes little pieces. So, even though an organization's been at it for several years, doesn't mean it's sustainable, I guess is my point. So that's basically what we wanted to cover on this topic of culture. We always leave time for questions or sharing. We had some great sharing the first episode, a little less, but good sharing the second episode, no sharing in the third episode or webinar. So any questions? This is where, to Rose's comment earlier, you can type in the Q&A. We'll give it some time. It seems to take a little time for people to type things in. Any questions that are on your mind? Hopefully I didn't discourage you when I said it takes years to develop culture in a single site. 2 to 3 years, begin to create the culture. Any questions? Any sharing? I would love to hear if anyone on this webinar has been at this for a while and, has some reflections on how well they're developing the culture, a maintenance excellence culture. I'd love to hear that. I don't know, Rose. I don't see any.
Nope, I don't see any notes yet. We have a few more minutes. If we want to, if anyone wants to share, we are available to answer any questions you might have or comments regarding the webcast.
Do we still have people online?
Yeah, there's still people online, so we can just wait a minute or so and then we'll let everyone go.
It's a beautiful thing when organizations stick with it for a couple of years. It really is. When I look back and remember how the adversarial relationship between the different departments and functions and how an organization was able to overcome that, it's a beautiful thing. Makes it all worthwhile. Thank you, Atul. Thank you for attending. I think that's it, Rose.
All right, doesn't look like we have any further questions or comments, so we'll go ahead and end for today, give you back 10 minutes. And thank you all for joining. You can contact Tooling U if you have any questions or would like additional information for training or future webcasts. Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.